Leaders are made, not born. Repeat after me. Leaders are made, not born. If you have only 2 takeaways from this entire podcast, not just this episode, but the whole kit and caboodle, leadership can be learned, and leader development enhances you professionally, but personally also. Let's dive into this week's episode of The Communicative Leader. Hello and welcome to The Communicative Leader, hosted by me, Dr. Leah O'Million Hodges. My friends call me Dr. O. I'm a professor of communication and a leadership communication expert. On The Communicative Leader, we're working to make your work life what you want it to be. So much of our attention as budding or practicing leaders, as a society as a whole, is focused externally. What's going on out there, outside of myself, outside of my group, outside of my organization? Well, this episode is going to focus on 2 facts. Leadership can be learned. Leadership development enhances you personally and professionally. How are we going to arrive at these 2 facts? Well, a focus on communication, authenticity, and reflection. Instead of leader development as something that's accessible via external channels, even amazing things like this podcast, I want us to first consider how our own unique experiences, skills, and personality position us to be successful leaders. Kevin Cashman wrote a book called Leadership from the Inside Out, and I really appreciate the emphasis he places on parlaying your personal experiences as your leadership strengths. We're going to look at Cashman's 7 pathways to help you consider vital questions about, you as a person. What are your values, your goals, so you have a better understanding of how you may communicate and connect with others when you're in a formal leadership role, and even when we're not in those formal leadership roles, but remembering that we're always in a position of influence. We're influencing ourselves. We're influencing others whether or not we're aware of it. Pathway 1, personal mastery. Dun, dun, dun. I know, it sounds so heavy, right? Just so final, personal mastery. But just hang with me for a minute. While this pathway sounds very weighty, it's really just a commitment to being reflective. Sure, there's a little bit more, but generally speaking, if we're taking the time to identify what is truly important to us, we're going to have a better idea of how we're going to react in various situations. We're going to have an idea of how our morals are going to come into play and serve as our rudder while we're leading the ship. Also central to this pathway, moving from reacting or coping, as Cashman calls it, to creating values and demonstrating these values through our behaviors. So how do we get there? How do we move from even a thoughtful reaction to leading with character? Well, we can reflect on questions like, what fears do I have to face in order to lead with character? What fears do I have to face in order to lead authentically? What does leading from character look like for me? Letting go of others' expectations, or even what we think they expect from us, to just being us. Well, there you go, my friends. You're already mastering that pathway 1. Pathway 2, purpose mastery. Also pretty heady, huh? Well, I think we're just going to have to embrace this. We're going to go deep, my friends. So how do you make a difference? What is it that you do that others don't bring to the table? Now we're connecting your values from pathway 1 with your natural strengths and abilities. How do your natural gifts allow you to help others? How do those natural gifts, these elements that make you, how do they allow you to leave an environment better than you found it? Pathway 3, interpersonal mastery. Oh, we're definitely speaking my language here. Communication focus. Oh, aren't they all? But again, this one is in the title, my friends. So let's think about how promotions often happen. Often individuals are promoted because they're incredibly good at a job. And on the surface, this makes sense, right? But again, just because you're an incredible salesperson, it doesn't mean that you're going to be incredible at managing a gaggle of salespeople, for example. Just because you're an incredible mechanic, like truly have a gift at discerning and fixing issues, doesn't necessarily mean you should open and manage a slew of garages. Promoting people because of a skills-based expertise to a managerial role means taking them away, in most cases, not all, but it means taking them away from the work environment in which they truly shine. The role of manager is essentially being top communicator. Naturally, there's more bundled in these formal authority roles, but again, without the ability to set a vision, communicate a persuasive and articulate plan, get employee buy-in, thoughtfully frame work requests and directives, you're not going to get too far. Interpersonal mastery requires a lot of reflection that can be really challenging. We like to think of ourselves as solid communicators, as those who care about others and demonstrate that care through our intentional communication practices. So this is one where it can be really helpful to solicit the help of trusted friends, colleagues, and family members. I had a graduate student this summer who told me he learned more about his leadership from a 5-minute conversation with his mom than he had in his previous 40 years. What? How was that? He used a course reflection as an opportunity to ask his mom and a good friend to reflect on and talk to him about his strengths, but more importantly, his areas for improvement as a communicator. Well, mom didn't hold back, but in true parent fashion, she focused on his strengths, but then a couple specific things he could do to be a better communication partner. Now he will always stop to ask his conversation partner, whether it's his mom, his partner, an employee, about their day or their project before launching into whatever he needs to explain or articulate or deliver. This might seem really small, right? But consider, with time, how it feels to work with the manager who consistently asks and gasps, listens to what you're working on before transitioning to other business. So this leads us to pathway 4, change mastery. This one can be tough, especially for those of us, I feel so seen, who like to make a plan and stick with it no matter what. Change is good, but really, truly, joking aside, what happens if we refuse to change? If we try to keep fighting the flow? Well, a whole lot of hardship. Even if we're at a place where we feel like we are truly living our best life, then it is likely to continue to evolve with time. The sooner we learn to make friends with flexibility and adaptability, the easier life is, my friends, and especially germane to this podcast, the better positioned you are to lead formally and informally. When we're able to demonstrate this, to celebrate this, to take some of the fear away from others in regard to change, gosh, think of the gift that we give to our employees, but also to our romantic partners and to our kids as well. Pathway 5, resilience mastery. This is one of my favorite ones. I love this one because it offers express permission to take time for yourself. How do you build resilience? Sure, navigating adversity is one way, and a way that we're going to explore in great detail through the remainder of this podcast. But another way? We actually build a reservoir to draw from by doing activities that make us feel good. Whether you fill up by spending time with friends and family members or through running or curling up with a good book, these activities are not luxuries. No. They are essential actions to help you bolster your reservoir of resilience. This is so important. We're going to say it again. Self-care is not a luxury. It is essential. It is like breathing. It is like sleeping. It is like bathing. If we are not cared for, we cannot care for others. If we are run down, how do we help our team or group navigate that specially complicated project? How do we show them that we can do hard things? We take care of ourselves so that we can model patience, commitment, and resilience in good times, and especially in the challenging times. This leads us to pathway 6, being mastery. Geez, so we thought personal mastery was cerebral. Being, yes, at your very core. But again, this is a nice extension of the 5th pathway. This one is more about quiet, about downtime, individual reflection. Whereas resilience building for some of you out there, my extroverts, being mastery is having time set aside, whether for meditation or prayer, journaling, listening to music, those things that give you space to reflect and check in with yourself. This can also give you some insight in terms of moving from coping and reaction to leading with character. It can help you to sharpen the image of what's really important to you, revisiting those guiding morals and values. And now our final pathway, action mastery. I think of this one as leading as a whole person. Pathway 7 means that we are actively practicing the previous 6. We are authentic. We're not trying to model a certain type of leadership style, but rather we are present and we are ourselves. We're aware of our strengths, and sometimes even more importantly, the areas that we need to pay a little more attention to. We can build in safeguard for these then. Once we're operating at our full potential, we're in a position to mentor and to coach others as well. There it is, my friends, a roadmap for leading from the inside out. Yes, 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 easier said than done, I get it. But a roadmap is power. A roadmap gives us specific steps to take to get to where we'd like to go. So now we're going to return to our 2 fundamental leader development facts. 1, leadership can be learned, and 2, leader development helps us professionally, but it also helps us personally. Like I mentioned before, we're going to arrive at these 2 facts via a focus on communication, authenticity, and reflection. So our first fact, leadership can be learned. You might not know this about me, but I don't have very many pet peeves. Though there is one, I just have to say it. Sometimes my kids chewing loudly, very loudly in my ear. They're usually on top of me when they're doing this, many times at the same time. But generally speaking, that aside, I'm fairly relaxed. But what really gets under my skin, when people try to convince others that leaders are born and not made, that drives me nuts. Why? Because it can tap right into someone's fear that they are not a leader, or that perhaps they can't grow into the leader that they thought that they could be. It comes from this deficit perspective, and it's very exclusive. This view typically prizes those who already have privilege, and it discourages those who don't. No, we're just going to throw that one out. We're casting it to the side, and we are not looking back. Not just because I don't like it, because of the reasons above, but because it's wrong. A communicative view of leadership means that it is like any other communication-based skill. It can be learned, it can be improved, and it can be mastered. So how, you ask? Well, let's look at 2 functions of leaders, for example. Leaders inspire others. Leaders connect with others via their communication. They ask questions. They listen. They spend time with them. They develop relationships, build trust. Interpersonal mastery, anyone? What's more, inspiration for one employee is likely to look a whole lot different than for another employee. Does Tim need a tough love approach, borrowing from the years he spent in athletics with a coach who would motivate him? This communication is going to look way different than Della, who's told you that she shuts down when she feels criticized. What else do leaders do? They collaborate with their team to accomplish work goals. A formal leader might try to lead their team from the front, setting deadlines, assigning tasks, checking in periodically. They might also recognize they have the expertise on the team to lead from behind, to create space for the team to come together, to propose a path for completing the project. How does a leader figure this out? Again, they ask questions, they observe, they interact with their team members, they reflect on how their presence impacts the team and the team's collective output. Folks, this is both art and science, and it is all communication. Leaders are adept communicators. We've talked about this before, and we're going to talk about it again. What do leaders do? Leaders negotiate, they influence, they counsel, they coach, they inspire, they mediate, they're visionaries, they cheerlead, they're change agents, they're role models. I can go on and on. But friends, remember, it is hard because it is hard, not because you are doing it wrong. We never said leadership was easy. We said it was a communication-based skill that can always be improved, fine-tuned, and sharpened. So let's move on to our second truth. Our second truth is that leadership development enhances you professionally, of course, naturally, but also personally. Leader development can look like a lot of things. So there are some common organizational passages that allow you or force you, any way we want to look at it, to overcome adversity. And when we are looking at adversity, when we're working through this is a great opportunity to develop as a leader, but also as a person. Right? Think about joining a company and all of the uncertainty that comes with that. What about accepting a new leadership role? What about when a project goes sideways, right? The failure of a project. Coping with the bad manager. Maybe our peers, instead of being our collaborators, they're really competitive. Loss of ambition. That's a really tough one, right? Especially if we've been working to achieve and to grow and to evolve. Work-life balance, right? Maybe we feel like there aren't enough hours in the day and that work isn't getting our full attention and neither is our home life. What about loss of faith in the department or in the organization as a whole? In all of these situations and myriad others, we have options. Two of these options, my friends, include failing forward or failing backward. Many will fail backwards, and we've all had these moments, so it's important we're not pointing fingers and spending too much time shaking our heads at others, because this isn't easy. But again, this is not the goal. What happens when we fail backwards? Well, we blame others. We might repeat that same error. If yelling at our team didn't motivate them last time, what makes us think it's going to work this time? We set unrealistic expectations for ourselves and others. We internalize disappointments rather than learning from them. When it gets hard, we quit. We walk away. We decide we just can't do it. Well, what's the gold standard? What do exceptional leaders do instead? They take responsibility, like we just talked about on the previous episode. A litmus test for if you're leading and you're leading well, you are responsible, especially for mistakes or shortcomings. But you don't stop there. You make a new plan. You adapt. You learn from those mistakes. You take calculated risks. Right? You consider possible consequences, but potential benefits are greater. We not only persevere, but we remember our attitude matters. We're not grumbling through it. We're role modeling resilience. I want to give you some questions to consider when you bump up against disappointments or other challenges. These are ones that I actually find myself revisiting quite often too. Is this truly a failure? Or did I just fall short of the goal or the deadline or my expectation? What successes were actually contained in this failure? What can I learn from this situation so that I can do something differently next time? If I have to be grateful for one aspect of it, what is it? What is the one or maybe even more things that are actually a blessing or a positive? And how can I turn this into a success? The other day, I burnt the heck out of dinner. I'm telling you, friends, I was trying to pull together some culinary masterpiece in the Instant Pot. At some point, it started beeping and the machine actually said, burn notice. This is not good. Not salvageable. Turned to my inner monologue. I check in. I find myself thinking, what is a positive outcome here? Well, it meant I had permission to order pizza for dinner. Point being that one, you were glad you weren't over for dinner that night. Well, at least until I ordered pizza. But two, when we use these frames, certainly they can help us in our professional life, but also in our personal life. Instead of focusing on this giant heap of inedible food, it became something to shrug off, laugh about with my family, and note next time when I try to prepare something similar. This leads us to the last thing I want us to talk about in terms of leader development: who I was, who I am, and who I might become. There's a line of research in leadership literature that looks at life stories as justifications. It's this idea, as I said before, who I am, but also why I am here stories. How have I become a leader? Why have I become a leader? When we think about life stories as justifications, they help us uncover some leadership motivations. What is important to us? What do we expect from ourselves? And then very importantly, what does this mean that we expect from others as well? We're going to look at 5 different life stories that often emerge when we're considering our leadership skills and abilities. And I want you to think about which of these resonate with you. And at the end, I'm going to leave you with an activity to kind of dive more deeply into your own leadership self-story. The first theme is leadership development as a natural process. So again, this is the idea that whether as a child, perhaps you're the oldest child, perhaps you found yourself just emerging as the leader, the person who is organizing in groups, maybe it was on an athletic team, but you recognize you had some inherent communication talents that allowed you to influence others to help to organize the group or team. The second type of life story I want us to think about is leadership development out of struggle. So this is when someone emerges out of an ordeal, something that has been transformative or molded someone because they have a victory now, victory over a challenging circumstance, over a person, it could be, right? But they attest to the existence of the leader qualities that are needed, right? They have strong will, confidence, or proactive, ability to tackle challenge and to overcome adversity, usually demonstrating some grittiness and some independence. So these are often feel-good stories that we like to tell because it shows us that we too can overcome challenges. A third type of life story, leadership development as finding a cause. These are for folks who recognize that something was going on. So maybe it was a social injustice or some sort of movement that they were really passionate about. And because they identified with it, they became all in, right? And this really began to shape their identity, and especially their identity as a leader. Nelson Mandela is a really great example of this because he tells the story how he gradually developed or found this identity as a freedom fighter. Once he defined himself as such, it became his main identity and main purpose in life. Now, certainly that is a lofty example, my friends. But if we think about this world that we live in now, we think about these movements, then this might be something that you feel resonating with you in sharing your voice and showing up for these protests. The fourth type of life story that tends to be fairly common is leadership development as learning from experience. And this is one that tends to be very, very common, right? Because we recognize that with time, with hindsight, right, with reflection, that we have learned a lot from what we've done, right? The good, the bad, the ugly. So when we're thinking about leadership development as learning from experience, right, we perceive and relate our life story as a series of learning or training experiences, right? Learning from failures, from mistakes, but also learning from our achievement and learning from role models. In these stories, as a leader, we base our self-knowledge and convictions directly from the lessons we learned from our own experiences. The fifth type of life story I want to share with you is that of a non-leader. And this is an important one too. So when we think about a life story as a non-leader, it means individuals who are in a formal title of a leadership position. They're performing these functions. It does not mean that they're shirking their responsibilities. Others view them as a leader, but for them, at their core, this is still an external role that is being performed, not an aspect of their identity. Right? So individuals who kind of are making these connections, they might feel some doubt in terms of their ability to lead, or it might feel very ambiguous or ambivalent regarding their ability as a leader and the motivation to embrace the role. So again, this might be you, and this might be a challenging way in which to view yourself. But we recognize that when we're making these connections, when we're engaging in this reflection, it gives us some information from which then we can go forward. So this week, for our communication focus, I'd like you to think about your own self-story. Which of these types resonates with you and why? What does it say about your motivations as a leader? What does this mean in terms of what you expect from others who are on your team? This gives you an opportunity to reflect on who you were, who you are, and who you might become. So how do you do this? When I'm in a classroom, I ask students to just draw a horizontal line and think of this as the life story, right? What are the pivotal moments? What are the defining moments? What are the moments that shaped you? And to use that and reflect and see, gosh, is adversity really my best teacher? Or is it these small moments when I just keep my head down and I keep my eyes on my next goal that are really end up being transformative for me, right? So this is going to look different for all of us, but this is key. Again, that communication and reflection and intention in terms of continuing to develop as a leader. So what are some takeaways? First, I always want to remind you, you're in a position of leadership with or without a title. Make sure that you are leading yourself, never underestimating yourself and your own abilities. I want to read a quote to you that I really love. This is with former HP chairperson and CEO Carly Fiorini. She was asked where she found the strength and courage to deal with resistance she faced in a merger compact with HP, and I just love her reply. She says, I think leadership takes what I call a strong internal compass. And I use the term compass because what does a compass do? When the winds are howling and the storms are raging and the sky is so cloudy, you have nothing to navigate by, a compass tells you where true north is. And I think when a person is in a difficult situation, a lonely situation, you have to rely on that compass. Who am I? What do I believe? Do I believe we're doing the right things for the right reasons in the right way? And sometimes that's all you have. Now remember, lead yourself. Even if you feel like no one is watching, what do you want to model for yourself, right? Do you want to look in the mirror and find pride in the way in which you're handling yourself? Our second takeaway, humility is the antidote to hubris, right? Titles are granted, my friends, but respect is earned. It is not easy to earn respect, but it is really easy to lose it, right? So remembering to integrate these moments of reflection to make sure that when we are communicating, it is done with intention. As we talked about earlier, that we are engaging with ourselves and others in the environment in ways that are respectful, responsible, and safe. Next week on The Communicative Leader, we're going to look at when good people are bad leaders. Oof, I said it. It's not easy, but it is important that we talk about this and how to separate someone from this position. All right, my friends, that wraps up our conversation today. Until next time, communicate with intention and lead with purpose. I'm looking forward to chatting with you again soon on The Communicative Leader.